So I want to go over these really quickly. I wasn't here to stop the movie. It was my intention to be in the room. You've seen how I do it, where I'll stop and say something while you're watching the film, so it cues you to put down the correct notes. So now we got to do it after the fact, and I don't have a lot of time. I don't want to say the whole movie after watching the whole movie. So if you didn't do your homework yesterday, I don't think this will be enough. You can check out the film if you need it. But for everybody who kind of did it, you can check your notes. Please look up. More than twice what they said in the movie. Today we farm about half of all seafood. Study Goal 31 says, what's wrong with farming salmon? Maybe you've heard we started farming salmon because it looked like a good idea. There's 4 reasons why it turns out to actually be a pretty horrible idea. Number 1, they escape sometimes. And especially when your farmed species is different from your local species. Like in the Pacific, we farm Atlantic salmon. You can get this thing called genetic pollution or gene pollution. A hybrid you don't want. Like if you're trying to have a bunch of Chihuahuas and a Great Dane comes around, that could mess up your genetics for your Chihuahua babies.
What's bad about having a...
I got you.
Yeah.
So Atlantic salmon are from the Atlantic, which is different from the Pacific. There's 2 different oceans. And the Atlantic salmon have evolved for that. The Pacific salmon have evolved for this. Atlantic genes in Pacific salmon makes them weaker. And so basically we're taking our wild salmon and we're poisoning their genetics so they don't have the right genes to live in the Pacific. So they're less able to survive long periods without food, and they're less good at living in warm water. I can't remember what the genes are.
Put the Pacifics, why wouldn't they farm the Pacifics?
And so the reason that we don't, the obvious question, right? The reason that we don't farm the Pacific ones is the Atlantic ones grow much bigger, much faster.
Well, why don't we farm them in the Atlantic?
So that's true, but on the Atlantic we don't have the right coastal conditions. The water's too shallow, there's too many conflicts with land use. You know that the East Coast was developed first. So I'm not an expert on all this, but the problem is when we grow those over here, they escape and pollute our local genes. So escapement and genetic pollution is one reason.
Could that problem be solved by just having a larger tank? Or would that not work?
It's a lot of water, but yeah. Number 2, you might have seen the example from Norway. When you crowd a bunch of anything, disease becomes more likely. Like vaccination is important if you're at school because you're going to get coughed on by a whole bunch of other kids. And once diseases start to spread, those can go to other populations. Like what happened in Norway, they had a bunch of fish in pens, those got sick, and then that disease spread to local salmon. And in Norway, they had to kill all the local salmon, the native fish, so that the disease wouldn't spread to other neighboring countries and to wild fish stocks. So Norway had like a 25-year decline in salmon from 1 year when the farm got really sick. I don't know if you have to know this, it's good trivia. You have to know that it was Norway that had that disease problem. That's a famous example. Everybody knows in environmental science Norway. It's like the Chernobyl of fish farming. So you gotta know that it was Norway. And separately, you might want to know the name of the disease. Did anybody write this down? Was it IH? What?
Sockeye.
Yeah, Sockeye disease or IHN.
Oh,
Did anybody get that abbreviation yesterday?
Sea lice.
No.
Yes, IHN. Something wrong with like the blood that infects their nervous system, something. IHN was the name of that disease. Interesting trivia in Norway. Problem number 3, you farm fish in shallow water, so all their poop kind of piles up, and you get coastal pollution, algae blooms from all the decomposing poop. kind of fouls the water. It's like pouring a bunch of sewage out in your city. So fish poop, water pollution. And number 4, raising carnivores is just really inefficient. We thought that, oh, we're running out of salmon, let's grow them in cages, but the only way to feed them is to go out and kill a bunch of other seafood. Let's see if this sinks in. Please look up. Please look up. Producer, primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, consumer, right? First, second, third, and so on. Now, you might remember that as a general rule of thumb, about 10% of energy storage goes up per level. Remember that rule of thumb, 10%? Now, when you eat low on the food chain, that's more efficient. You might know that there's like humans that are trying to start, people that are trying to get humans to eat more insects, because insects are very efficient, they grow quickly, so they have a lot of energy storage. Raise your hand if you've heard of humans eating insects. Now, in the ocean, food webs are really big because there's algae eaten by plankton, eaten by another plankton, eaten by another plankton, eaten by a little fish, eaten by a medium fish, eaten by a large fish, eaten by a predator. And so there's a lot of those 10% cuts, and salmon are really high. So for number 4, salmon are high on the food chain. We have to kill a lot of ocean to grow salmon.
Wouldn't a solution to that just to have like other farms for smaller fish on the food chain?
Yes, and so there's a lot of solutions. One is eat vegetarian fish. Another one is eat lower on the food chain, like sardines and mackerel. Another one is find another source of this protein feed. But globally, the majority of farmed salmon are fed on ground fish meal, and you need a lot of oil for that, so you kind of got to use the whole fish. So we basically go out and catch just like huge nets full of seafood, and then we just grind it up and give that to the salmon. You know, it's like taking a whole bunch of fruit to grind it up to grow your fruit. Like, this is just not very smart. And salmon are particularly inefficient. And so this is like, it's really wasteful that we're raising carnivores.
And bluefin tuna are a lot worse, right?
Yeah, bluefin are likewise top of the food chain. Almost every fish you like is on the top of the food chain. Yeah?
Is most salmon like in the supermarket farmed?
Yes. Yeah, in the United States it is. If it says wild, it's hopefully wild, and people can still lie about labeling. But usually if it doesn't say wild, it is farmed. It's more likely. And this is the first year that we're also eating genetically modified farm salmon, which is kind of an environmental solution, but in the US we rarely label our fish. So a lot of people are nervous that it's not labeled. Not because it's known to be harmful, just that people like to know. Okay, yeah?
Do you feel like the Sandware fish market in the harbor is pretty trustworthy when they say wild and fun?
Oh, I mean, I know the guy who runs the fish market. He's pretty darn trustworthy, and I know the guys that catch most of that salmon. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of variation. My favorite salmon at the fish market is farm.
Oh, is the Scottish one?
Yeah, that's just like that's a really sustainable green farm. They use a lot of land-based protein.
Okay.
That's like a really high quality farm. And there is better fish farming on the horizon, but these are the problems that we have to solve for that.
Okay.
Scotland does a really good job with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, on that note, can hypothetically just feed fish that we produce on land, such as agriculture?
We'll get to that, yes.
Or
We'll get to that. Okay. Number 32, many parts of China have this thing called carp polyculture. Carp is a type of fish, like abbreviating carpinteria, carp. And polyculture means many varieties grown together. If you grow 3 or 4 varieties of carp in the same pond, you get a lot of benefits. Like number 1, that's fresh water. Number 2, it's super efficient. Having those 3 types of fish means you have almost a whole food web in the water.
wait, are they all carp or are they all different?
They're all different types of carp. And by the way, the movie talks about carp polyculture, but in most parts of China where people do polyculture, it's carp plus other species. So the example they showed was all carp, but most of China, they have fish pond polyculture that includes things that aren't carp, not what the movie showed. The best thing about the carp polyculture system, though, is carp eat farm waste. Kind of like a worm bin, where you can eat the worms.
What isn't carp considered like a waste, like what? Yeah, like a bottom feeder, and generally people are not a big fan of eating it.
You know, yeah. Yes, I'm not a big fan of eating it. But I've heard people say, like anything else, you know, you cook it right and it tastes different. And I think it's kind of like a learned, acquired habit. Some people love carp, I'm not a fan. These are surface feeder, water column feeder, and bottom feeder carp. They're vegetarians, they eat farm trash. Yeah.
What kind of fish are you trying to farm?
Catfish, another bottom feeder. Not my favorite, but anything you fry is good.
Oh, that's easy,
basically.
just run,
Yeah.
Tinder.
Next. Number 33. There's a bunch of reasons why shellfish. Shellfish is any invertebrate, so technically, ocean invertebrate. So technically, like crabs and lobster are shellfish, but most of the shellfish that are farmed are these kind: bivalves, oyster, mussel, clam, scallop. And these are probably the best answer that you're going to get on the AP test. If they ask you about protein, here's your answer. Shellfish are, number one, low on the food web. Like eating insects, this is at the very maximum of efficiency. So for square miles of ocean, this is the most protein you can make. They're low on the food chain, very efficient. Number two, they filter feed. So you don't have to get food, make food, deliver food, monitor food. They just clean the water. So they feed themselves. Oh, and by the way, your coastal water gets cleaner. How many of you are aware that Hope Ranch has an offshore shellfish farm?
What type of shellfish?
They mostly grow oysters, and now they're struggling because oysters won't grow in the ocean anymore because it's getting too acidic. But they're starting a project to grow mussels and scallops in those hanging cages.
You buy directly from them?
They're just like, I don't think so. They just hang direct from buoys.
How far,
What?
how far offshore?
You can swim out to it if you're moderately decent fair swimmer. Like when you're at the Brown Pelican, what's it called? The restaurant at Henry's.
Apes,
Oh, no, when you're at Boathouse and you're looking out the water, you can go right, like not the dog beach toward Hope Ranch. And from that point, like right when you walk around at low tide to get to Hope Ranch private beach proper, if you look straight out, you can occasionally see usually you'll see the four corner buoys because they're the bright ones. But then in between of those four, there's a network of buoys that all have suspended cages. I don't know, it's not that far, a few hundred yards. Number three, shellfish are really fast growing, so you can get your money back really fast. Number four, they don't go anywhere. They're not going to escape. And number five, you can usually farm native shellfish. So wherever you live, there's probably a local species that you can just make more of. I love that idea. Finding ecosystems that give us native food and then just helping them give us more food. It is important in number 33 that we talk about bad shellfish farming. So the ugly side is shrimp farming in Thailand. where poor people who don't really get to control what happens have their wild seafood supply turned into farms against their will, then they gotta start working in these farms to get the money to buy food. And unfortunately, shrimp farming is devastating to coastal ecosystems because of all the antibiotics and all the runoff. So shrimp farming, the way it's done in many parts of Southeast Asia, is probably the rock bottom of seafood production because of the social implications. I have a really big chip on my shoulder about farming shrimp. Number 34, oh my god, the loophole with the tuna. How many of you caught it in the movie? It's what?
It's basically the tuna they catch in the wild and put up in the cages to make fat or fatty. They don't include them in like the kind it's caught in the wild and harvested.
That's entirely correct. And so here's the crazy thing that we count, like if you're a commercial fishing boat and you go catch tuna and you bring them in, we're waiting for you at the dock and we go call in a registered tuna fisherman, let's count these fish, and we have to report that internationally so we don't overfish the tuna. But if he uses that exact same boat to go outside and catch the exact same tuna and he keeps them alive and he drags the net over to Eamon's big floating tuna pens, he comes back empty. Eamon's got pens where he's feeding his tuna, and when you kill those, you bring them in on a set of boats that aren't registered tuna fishermen because they're not out in open water fishing tuna. So we don't count those. There's no step of like, hey, what's Colin doing? Or like, hey bro, where'd you get those tuna? Like that doesn't exist. And it's just a stupid loophole. And a lot of countries are negotiating how to regulate this now. The movie's a little bit outdated. We're starting to solve that.
Is that the big problem with tuna fishing? Like, if that's fixed, do you think the tuna...
No, I mean, tuna's got a bunch of problems. A lot of it's caught in international waters. A lot of it's caught in national waters for countries that don't have a defense. So when I was on Tabarua surfing, every night, like as soon as the sun goes down, this international fishing fleet would come in and steal all of Fiji's tuna. And then like, we wake up before sunrise to get on the first boat out to Cloudbreak. And like right before you get on the boat, you can see the sunrise. And off in the distance, you see all the international ships like sailing away with all their lights on, carrying away all of Fiji's tuna. Like tuna's screwed for a bunch of reasons. The ranching is just inefficient because of the producers, and it's just not regulated carefully where they get their material.
So that was kind of a lot to keep track of. To put it more simply, people can transport and hide tuna behind the backs of people who like record the tuna deal. Okay.
You got the right answer. So the problem here is you can go behind the backs of people who monitor tuna catch. That's the bottom line about tuna ranching.
Laundering.
Yeah.
But what they're doing is legal? Like,
I think so.
Like
I don't know. I know that like, you know, I follow all of these internet discussions about how to do better in regulating food. And one of the big ones is it just seems like those international bodies that have the master checklist of tuna in different parts of the ocean have not had accurate reporting of how many tuna are going into the pens. And I care about that because one of the biggest pen programs for tuna is in Ensenada, and I drive past it all the time on my way going into Mexico. And that's the majority of the tuna that you eat here. Like if you go to Albertsons and you buy tuna, that's probably either stolen from Fiji or from the fish pens out in Ensenada. That's a lot of our tuna. Yeah.
I just know that I already said, sorry.
Okay, good. I like it when you forget, thank you. Number 35, I've got some really quick snippets and then we're done. Watch this. Pollution and diseases are kept away from other fish. Freshwater vegetarian. freshwater trashitarian. And you don't know that that's his catfish? Did you guys notice the way that the guy said it when he said catfish?
Yeah.
That guy had a thick old Louisiana accent.
Should
I
have been
love it.
subtitled.
I love it. And shellfish, as we already discussed, a whole bunch of reasons. The shellfish thing was a wrap up at the end to remind you of all the stuff that you already wrote in number 33. There are 3 questions left from a movie that I don't plan to show you. If I have to be absent for some reason, then we'll do that other movie. Otherwise, we're going to skip those 3 questions.
So I just remember that question about the tuna. Could you essentially protect them by having like boats like go around them and make sure nobody else goes? Like, could that be the solution?
Yes, I mean, ocean's really big, so there's really no way to monitor. Even satellites can't get it all. It's a lot of data. Okay, now, we have just a few minutes, but I want to make progress on assignment 4.1. There's a few study goals that are really important to discuss today, and I gotta go fast because we talked a lot about guns. In study goal number 6, did I already tell you that the O horizon, the organic material, is the most important element?
Yeah.
The secret of all the nutrition of soil is that O horizon, the organic content on top. Number 7, erosion is making a comeback around the world. Erosion was really bad when we were learning to farm in large scales. Erosion was fixed. 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, globally erosion was prevented. And around the 90s and the 2000s, farming intensified again. We started running out of the easy farming. And so farming became more competitive. The economy had different priorities. And so globally, starting in the 1990s, erosion came back. Today, we have some of the worst erosion around the planet that we've ever had. It's like a global dust bowl. And nobody talks about it because it's not all in one place like the dust bowl was. There's 3 main reasons why erosion is making a comeback that you should probably know. Number 1, farmers don't really do this anymore. Farmers no longer maintain the O horizon. Most farmers don't have organic material on top. By the way, if you want to know like the number 1 question to ask a farmer, like if you could go to the supermarket and get the right info, that's probably the most important question. Even more than organic and conventional.
Would the churches have like
How much organic material do you have on the surface of your farm? Reason number 2, machines are cheap and energy is cheap, so we're just doing more and more tillage. Like globally, we're probably breaking up the dirt too much. As a global average, we just do too much tilling. It's easier to work, it saves you money because you don't have to pay farm workers, it saves you money because you can flip the productivity more cycles in a year. And so farmers are just too intensive with the machines. It's tempting for me to use machines, I do it all the time. Problem number 3, like Australia, the European grasses, everybody thinks that they're farming in England when they're not in England anymore. So native grasses would help a lot, but most ranchers still grow European grasses. you could remind yourself, check the Australia notes in the movie. And this reminds me, when I was researching for this lecture, I saw the most amazing map. So I just thought I would recommend it in case you guys are bored and you just want to see something fascinating. You should Google world map of countries the United Kingdom has not invaded. The UK has invaded almost the entire world. There's very few countries, including mine, Argentina.
Russia?
I don't know, but check your map. There's very few countries that aren't in that map. All right. The Dust Bowl was basically those three things that I said, by the way. Bad weather always happens. So the Dust Bowl also had bad weather, but bad weather comes and goes. There's bad weather all the time. So that list I gave you, whenever there's bad weather, you get a Dust Bowl. I need to talk about 8 and then the warm-up and then we're all set. Oh my God. Salmon is the countries that the UK has invaded.
Wait, salmon is invaded or like?
Salmon color.
Salmon color is the country that. Ah, damn it. Yeah, Andrew. All right, here we go. Number 8. I've got a list for you. Natural and organic fertilizers are things that decompose, like this. Things that decompose, like manure, plant material, feathers and blood, ashes, wood chips, good old compost, things that decompose. And every farmer on the planet knows this, and still a bunch of farmers don't use these because, please look up, that's slow. The whole point of organic material is we just pile on more of it, and I figure some of it's like decomposing somewhere. But the nice thing about synthetic fertilizer is you can be like, oh, this plant over here needs some potassium, boom, potassium. It's like giving somebody an injection right away. So synthetic fertilizers, man-made fertilizers, by the way, they're usually made from petroleum or rocks. So it's really labor intensive. It's kind of dirty jobs to make our fertilizers. Fertilizers are sudden. Farmers love it. I have been there. I've seen it. It's amazing. You can walk up to a crop, press a button, goes through the irrigation timer. You come back tomorrow, the plants look different. You come back in 2 weeks, the plants are completely transformed. Synthetic fertilizers are sudden. You can still turn it around. When you're trying to grow your crop and it doesn't look right, you can fix it. This, like if I'm growing broccoli and the broccoli's not getting enough potassium and I throw a bunch of like compost on there, that might not fix the broccoli now, it'll just help broccoli next year. This is slow. And crap, I have to stop.
Should I stop shooting?
Thank you.